prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the chance to come together and to learn from each other, to talk about these things, to consider what it's like to be in your image, and to share with each other how we can better become like you and to be seen to be like you by others. Please open our hearts and minds as we consider the things from your word and consider how to be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, welcome to the class on envy. I have to say, I really wanted the class on gratitude. The class on gratitude. The questions are better. Material's better. I think Randy liked Tim better.
So I'm guessing that you were being envious.
But you know, there's still a chance that Tim could get sick. And I could take over that class. Or better yet, that's kind of leaving things to chance. I bet I could spread a pretty good rumor about Tim that would make nobody want to have him as a teacher. This was the point at which you were supposed to stop laughing, I have to say. And why is that? So, at first, what was kind of it was kind of a little joking matter. What point did it start to turn a little dark? Maybe.
When you begin to plan.
All right, when I began to plan, when I began to think about what would happen if Tim met with some misfortune. And then I started to think about what happened if I caused that misfortune. And so that's what I wanted to talk about tonight a little bit. And you'll see some of these questions that I wanted you to look at before class started. They'll happen to match up a lot with our class objectives. And that is, how do you give a definition of envy? What would you say is a textbook definition of envy? Anyone? Sam?
Wanting something you don't have that you can see someone else has. It's kind of the textbook. I mean, you can use any number of examples. I covet your minivan.
Okay. Well, let me tell you a few things about that minivan before you covet it too much. No, you see something somebody else has and you want it. Okay, that's so. Like I thought about how Tim has the class on gratitude, and I would have liked to have that. By the way, I didn't ask for the class on gratitude. I think I actually asked for the one on either discouragement or complaining. But anyway, we'll press on. But no, Tim had the class on gratitude. I was saying that I wanted to have that. Okay, what else? What other, like we said, things started to go dark.
I always think of it as just feeling bad because somebody else has something good that you don't.
Okay, so now now it's not just that I want something that somebody else has, it's that I'm feeling bad that somebody else has that. Okay, Debbie.
Kind of the same thing. You're comparing yourself to the other person. Therefore, you're feeling lesser because of their success or whatever, and the jealousy pops in.
Yeah, you're feeling bad about you're wanting bad things for somebody else because you don't feel good about where you're at. Okay, Tammy?
The saying, sick with envy, it's not just a desire or a wanting, it's a really gut-wrenching emotional event to be envious.
Yeah. So that it's a really deep, dark emotion. The other things that we're going to do with this class today, hopefully, as soon as the clicker kicks in, we want to give some biblical examples of envy. We want to talk about some problems that are caused by envy. And we want to give some modern examples about how we struggle with envy. How many people in here would say you struggle with envy on a daily basis?
Not daily.
All right, let's see how we do as we get through the class. All right, so those will be hopefully what you can do at the end of the class. Let's talk about the definition of envy. And this first part is quoted in your book. Envy comes from the Greek word, don't hold me to this, phonos. Okay, it's up there on the board. The feeling of displeasure produced by witnessing or hearing of the advantage or prosperity of others. Somebody else, something good happens to somebody else and you are upset about it. But, and that's the part that's quoted in our book, but Vines goes a little bit further to talking about this. It says, note, and it gives the Greek word for zeal or jealousy, which I didn't put up here. Zeal or jealousy is to be distinguished from phthonos. The distinction lies in this, that envy desires to deprive another of what he has. Jealousy desires to have the same or the same sort of thing for itself. So if I'm jealous of Tim getting to teach a class on gratitude, then that means I would be satisfied if I could teach a class on gratitude. But if I'm envious of Tim, that means I want to take his class away from him. Do you see how envy is a little bit more subtle and a little more dark, perhaps, than jealousy? So I can be jealous, and I'll be satisfied if I get the same thing. But if I'm envious, I'm only going to be happy if I'm actually taking that thing away from somebody else. That's a lot darker. Sam?
So it's got a kind of a connection. I occasionally hear the term Schadenfreude, I think it is, that feels very dark always to me. I haven't ever really thought of envy that way. That's the definition of that one is pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. Kind of has a similar kind of feel that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, so you're getting pleasure from somebody else's misfortune. In the case of envy, it's because you're benefiting from that. So if I am dashing by the cop on the side of the highway and somebody else gets pulled over, I'm like, get him! That's maybe an example of more what you're talking about. But if I look at it from the thought of, if the cop pulls him over, he's too busy to pull me over for the next few minutes, and I can go for Autobahn speed down the highway. So I've now benefited from that person being pulled over. So maybe that may be an interesting, I may be trying to force that a little bit too much, but that's kind of what I would think of. Okay, now he's busy with somebody else. All right, and I have the picture up there, kind of in case anybody has any doubts about what the picture is. There's the one character from Lord of the Rings that's found the gold ring, and he's happy about it. And now this person behind him is envious and is getting ready to choke him to death and take the ring from him. So perhaps a kind of combining a little jealousy and greed. And some other things about the ring, which we don't need to get into in a Bible class. But it was one of the best examples I could think of. So let's take a look at some scriptures real quick that may support this definition. Take a look at, somebody want to read for me? Proverbs 3, 31 through 32. Raise a hand. I'll even let you get to it. And then somebody be standing by with Ezekiel 35, 10 through 12. Who has Proverbs 3? Okay, Randy.
31 through
32. Yes.
Do not envy the oppressor and choose none of his ways. For the perverse person is an abomination to the Lord, but his secret counsel is with the upright.
Okay, so a perverse person. Which version are you reading out of?
New King James.
New King James. Okay, we got anybody with a little different reading?
A devious person.
A devious person. Okay. Do not envy a man of violence. Do not choose any of his ways, for the devious person is an abomination to the Lord. Tammy?
That's exactly what I heard.
Okay. All right. So now we're not envying a man of violence. And maybe this is talking, maybe now, of course, now that I look at it even more, I was thinking more the devious person being not just the person of violence, but also the person who's envying him. So that one I may have a little bit wrong. Let's go to Ezekiel 35, though, and I think yes, Sam.
I have that passage.
Go for it.
From Bible Basic English, because you have said the two nations and the two countries are to be mine, and we will take them for our heritage, though the Lord was there. For this cause by my life, says the Lord, I will do to you as you have done in your wrath and in your envy, which you have made clear in your hate for them. And I will make clear to you who I am when you are judged by me. And you will see that I, the Lord, have knowledge of all the bitter things you have said against the mountains of Israel, saying they have been made waste, they are given to us, take for our heritage.
Okay, and if you skip back to verse 30 or verse 1 of the chapter, can you tell me who that's being directed to?
And the word of the Lord whom we saved. So that would be directed to Ezekiel, I imagine.
Right. Well, that's who's going to bring that word. Yeah. So turn toward the Mount Seir, and who is Mount Seir? Who does it represent? It represents Edom. How well did Edom and Israel get along?
The same as Jacob and Esau.
The same as Jacob and Esau. That's right. And you see, at one point, Israel's able to put Edom under David. They're able to make them a tributary. They're able to subdue them, because later on you read about Solomon being able to build ships at the port of Ezion Geber. And where was that? In Edom. All right, so there's this constant friction between Israel and Edom, to the point that whenever something bad happens to Israel, how does Edom feel about it?
They rejoice.
All right, they're getting their just rewards. And to the point where Edom, at one point in Obadiah, God says, you could have helped them, but you just kind of stood aside. You let these things happen to your brother, and so you're going to receive judgment. Very similar to what he says here in Ezekiel. Yes, Randy.
Verse 12 in New King James says, Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have heard all your blasphemies, which you have spoken against the mountains of Israel. So I don't remember what the word was in the version that Sam was reading, but it wasn't blasphemies. I think it was. Sam, do you remember what?
I was going to say envy, probably. Let me find
Well,
it.
envy was in verse 11.
You said in verse which?
Verse 12, I've heard all your blasphemies which you have spoken.
Let's see. As you can see, I have of all the bitter things which you have
Bitter
said
things,
against.
yeah.
Bitter.
Okay. Lots of different things. I've got outrageous things in mind. Roger.
The standard says the revilings.
Revilings. So basically they say God's abandoned Israel, and now we get to benefit from that. So here they are. They're eagerly accepting these bad things that have happened to Israel because now it appears that they will get some sort of advantage out of it. All right. Let's think of some biblical examples real quick. What are some examples from the Bible that you can think of when you think of envy?
Ahab, envious of Naboth's vineyards.
Okay, Ahab and Naboth, which is a great example. So many dark things about that story. At first, when Ahab goes to Naboth, anybody remember what he wants? Says, I want your vineyard. Remember what Naboth's answer was?
I can't give it to you. It's part of my inheritance.
That's right. That's my portion in Israel. I can't give it to you. And was he right according to the law? He was absolutely right. And Ahab, what does he do about it at first?
He offers him a better vineyard.
He offers him a better vineyard. That's right. I'll give you a better vineyard. But when Naboth turns him down after that, what does he do? He mopes. He's going into the room sulking to the point where Jezebel comes in and says, "What? Are you king of Israel or what? Do something about it." Ahab at first, we would describe him as being what? While he was just moping in his room. He's jealous. But then Jezebel offers him a little bit of a deal, or a little better deal. Do you remember what Jezebel does?
Falsely accuses him.
She has him accused according to God's law. She has him accused of violating God's law, the very law that he had hung his hat on when he told Ahab no. So it's kind of an idea Jezebel's doing the hoist by your own petard bit. So when Ahab moved to action, what was that? Envy. And because of it, Naboth was stoned. You could say further on that Jezebel later died in the same spot as a result. But in the immediate context, Naboth loses his life because Ahab envied something that he had. Okay, great one. What else? Let's get another example going. Yes, sir. David and Bathsheba. Yeah, and expound on that a little bit.
He wanted Bathsheba, and he went out and sought ways to gain her.
Okay.
In fact, to the point of sending
Uriah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to the front lines to be killed.
Yeah. That's a good one. And I struggled with that one a little bit. But Jen mentioned that as well when we were talking about the class. And I could see that argument. Let me kind of take it for a moment. What did David have to do to get Bathsheba?
Tell her to come to him.
He basically just had her come in. And we're not told exactly what kind of pressure he might have applied, or if she was somewhat of a willing party, or what. Doesn't, at least from the text, we're not able to ascertain that. But so David, at this point, he's already had that relationship. And when does he turn to thinking about murder? When she's pregnant, for one, and number two, what can he not get Uriah to go and do?
Spend time with his wife.
He can't get him to go down and spend time with his wife. He says, my fellow Israelites he was a Hittite, so I don't know you could say my fellow Israelites, but my fellow soldiers are out on the battlefield. I can't go home and enjoy the comforts of being at home while my fellow soldiers are on the battlefield. And so he couldn't arrange things so that when she was revealed to be pregnant, that people would think it was Uriah's child and not his. So there may be a degree of envy in there, but I tend to say that it's more of a cover, that he's looking to cover up what he's already done. But that's a good one, and I could see an argument for envy in that. Okay, what else? Let's see. I'm seeing hands come up all over the place. All right, we'll go Mike, Larry.
So staying with David, though, but David in an earlier part of his life, when Saul had killed his thousands, but David killed his 10,000s, and that had Saul started, I think, being envious of David's skills and his ability to sing, and everybody seemed to love him, and why is God blessing him and not me? So I think Saul was envious of David.
Okay, so Saul and David. David kills Goliath, and then he's going off and fighting the Philistines, and then he's coming back, and now people are starting to sing his praises, literally singing his praises, to the point where Saul is attributed to having killed thousands, but David's got his 10,000s. Now, what had Saul lost at this point? Let's think about that for a moment. What had Saul lost?
Fame, for one thing.
Well, he'd lost fame. Even before that, though, what had happened? I had started to say what had happened to Saul. What did Saul do?
He didn't kill the Amalekites and destroy them, and he brought the king back and all the cattle and things, and Samuel told him, God has turned away from you, and you will not keep your kingship.
All right. So Saul had been told to go out and completely wipe out the Amalekites. Nobody left. And Saul ends up sparing some of the best of the people, the animals, their king, and he's bringing them all back. And he tries to make the excuse that he's bringing them all back so we can sacrifice them. We do some good things with them. And Samuel tells him at this point, your kingship, God's rejected it. And not only that, but what about his family? Would his family sit on the throne after him? No. In fact, what did he say? I've taken it away from you and given it to who? I've given it away to your servant. I'm trying to remember the exact word, maybe neighbor. I've given it to somebody else. And so when David comes along and they're singing his praises and they're giving him more praises, then Saul's like, well, what more can they give him except for the kingdom? So he's figuring, and I think to some extent, and this is me speculating, what else had Saul lost in all of that? What was his relationship with God like?
It was bad enough that he went to a medium at one point to get word, to ask Samuel to talk to him again.
Yeah. Samuel is gone at this point. He's not having anything more to do with Saul. In fact, who went and anointed David king? Samuel. And what kind of spirit does Saul have at this point? He has a troubling spirit, right? Because David at one point is actually sent to go play the harp to kind of improve Saul's mood. Maybe some people have speculated that it's some sort of depression. But to me, it's that lack of relationship that he has with God, and now he sees David coming along. And when he asks David, where's his trust? And he offers him his armor, and David's like, my trust is in God. Is that a faith that Saul has? No. So I think there's, to some extent, he's envious of his faith. And so what does Saul then later on start to do? What is he looking for opportunities to do? Kill David. Yeah. a cover-up, or at least he's not really even looking for a cover-up. David's sitting there at the feast, and Saul throws his spear right at him. Yeah, he's ready to kill David no matter what he faces for it. Larry, you had another one.
Well, David was envious of Uriah's honor. David had just done something very dishonorable, and Uriah, he was straight in every way.
Yeah.
So that's why David hated him.
Now David gave the answer, or Uriah gave the answer David might have given a few years ago. That's a great point. I like that. Okay, and then there was one other. Somebody else had a biblical example. Where was it?
Oh, Joseph and his brothers.
Okay, Joseph and his brothers are brought up in the book, and so Joseph's been having all these great dreams, and now the brothers have a chance to he's been getting all this favoritism from Jacob, and now his brothers have an opportunity to kind of maybe deprive him of that. They're willing to kill him at first, and then they sell him. What would they have stood to gain from that?
Their father's love,
Their-
favoritism.
Their father's love, their father's affection, possibly some favoritism. Although, I don't know that we ever see them getting that. I mean, we see his concern. Obviously, when one brother is kept in Egypt and they want to bring Benjamin out, but I don't know that I ever see them getting what they thought they would get out of it. That's an interesting part.
Robin mentioned Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. Okay, what did Cain or what did Abel have that Cain didn't have?
Pleasing sacrifice.
All right, a pleasing sacrifice, and so God even calls him out on it. Like you have the opportunity, just like he did, to do something good. And what was Cain's solution? Kill him, and perhaps that would eliminate the competition.
How about the Sanhedrin against Jesus?
Okay, Sanhedrin against Jesus. Pilate knew that because of envy they had delivered him up. All right, what did they stand to get out of it? What would they have gotten? What would they get out of Jesus being put to death?
Their authority back.
Pardon?
Their authority back. They were losing their authority.
Okay,
Their security with Rome.
they're okay. So in John they talk about their security as a nation with Rome, possibly their authority, their influence. I mean, you're going to have a whole bunch of followers that don't have a leader right now. Where might they turn to? And let's see.
James and John.
James and John, how were they envious?
Well, there was just the wanting to be on the right side of Christ, have an important position. They were not envious yet, but that was certainly leading toward it.
Well, let's think about that. What did they ask? What did their mama ask for them to have? For them to sit on his right hand and his left. If they were doing that, what did that mean for the other 10?
There's no more hands left.
There's no more hands. There's no more hands left at this point. You stack them on top of each other, I guess. Yeah, if those two got it, the rest of them wouldn't. So there's perhaps some envy there. They're willing to deprive the rest of them for that opportunity by having their mama. Sorry, I'm having a little fun with that. But they do. They have somebody else come for them. Okay, we're getting some good ones here. Any others before we move on?
Haman and Mordecai in the book of Esther.
Yes, Haman and Mordecai. All right. So expound on that a little.
Haman didn't like that he was getting honor from the king, but Haman wouldn't bow to him God. And Mordecai wouldn't, but, so Haman said, it's beneath me to kill him, so I'll just wipe out all the Jews. And that was what he started to plan to do. And then he, as he's fermenting this plan, the king can't sleep one night and is up reading other things that have happened, and he finds out that Mordecai has heard about a plot against him, and he's like, we never did anything for him. We never gave him credit or a reward for this. So he calls Haman in and asks him, so what should be done for this guy? You know, if somebody did something great, what should we do? And Haman's thinking, oh, he's going to tell me, he's going to do these things for me. So he starts listing all these things he wants. And he's then told to go give them to Mordecai. That just drives him even more so that he is definitely going to push this plot through to kill all the Jews.
Yeah, he says the king tells him, okay, go do this for Mordecai. We're not told of his reaction right away, but by the time, and I can only, now that I think about it, think about Nehemiah and how it's said that you're not supposed to be sad in the presence of the king. Imagine how hard he had to bite his tongue just to try to keep a straight face. But then later on, he's going home with his face covered. This has the header, the discomfiture of Haman. That's kind of a nice picture. All right, so Haman hates Mordecai, and then when something good happens to Mordecai, he's extremely upset about it, to the point of continuing with his plans against the Jews. Okay, I don't know how these got up there right away, but there they are. So Cain and Abel, Saul and David. But then think about David and his two sons, Absalom and Adonijah, who both rebelled against him. Absalom to the point where David actually has to flee the city. Adonijah to the point where David has to move up plans to crown Solomon as king, to keep another Absalom from happening. Okay, Ahab, we got Ahab in there, awesome. Satan. Think about that for a moment. Now, it has been mentioned that I read out of the Jerusalem Bible, which does include the Apocrypha. And I did a little quick search for envy at one point, and it brought back one quote here, which has gone kind of off the screen. For God created human beings to be immortal. He made them as an image of His own nature. Death came into the world only through the devil's envy, as those who belong to him find to their cost. This is from a book called The Wisdom of Solomon, which is apocryphal. But think about that for a moment. How does Satan show envy? What does God have that Satan doesn't have? Or what could God have? Our souls, children, people that want to be conformed to His image. And so what does he do in the very beginning? He deceives Eve, then deceives Adam, and potentially throws a whole fly in the ointment of God's plan, theoretically. Out of envy, Satan might have done that. So that's not scripture, but it's an interesting thought. All right, so those are some examples of envy. Let's talk about some consequences. We've already talked about some. What sins have you already seen that have come out of people's envy? Murder. What else?
Loss of power and place and kingdoms.
Okay. Yeah, so whole kingdoms have been shaken. Okay, what else? What other things have happened? Yes, Randy.
One of the things that I noted in a theme with several of the scriptures that were mentioned associated with envy was strife. So the churn and the turmoil.
Okay. The churn and the turmoil. All right. So upheavals. Let's think about one interesting example. Can positive things come out of envy at all? Possibly some self-improvement. How do you say?
Well, I'm envious of you because you do something really, really well, and I better myself trying to be like you. So.
Okay. All right, I like that. Let's flip over to Philippians real quick. And somebody read Philippians chapter 1 and verse 15. Actually, let's back that up. Who wants to start at verse 13? Okay, Leroy?
As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill.
And you stop at verse 17.
The latter to do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel.
And read 17.
The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains.
Okay. So Paul's saying that the gospel is being preached. Everybody understands that I'm in chains for the gospel. And it's causing some people to preach the gospel more and more. And some are doing it out of goodwill, because Paul's sitting over here and he can't do it as effectively as he used to. So there are some people that are wanting to fill the gaps because they want they want the gospel to spread. But what are some other people doing it out of? Roger?
Preaching the gospel boldly. Because of what Paul, his stand that he takes, is willing to do what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it emboldens them to preach and teach the gospel in the same manner.
Okay. Tammy?
Some of them were envious of Paul, and now they see an opportunity to get one over on Paul because he can't do it anymore.
That's right. Hey, Paul, think of all the things that Paul's famous for. He's known in all the churches. He writes all these letters. And now he's sidelined. What does that mean for me? It means maybe I can pick up on a little bit of that glory. Or maybe there's even some things that Paul wouldn't be too happy if I preached about. But now I have a chance to do that while Paul's sitting here on the sidelines. Yeah. But what does Paul say about it in the next verse, verse 18?
Either way, Christ is being proclaimed, and in this he is rejoicing.
Okay, so Paul's like, at least the gospel is being preached. And I'm not sure he's saying that about anybody that has motive, that would necessarily be teaching something false at that point. But somebody who's just out there because, okay, now I can get maybe a little bit more recognition now that Paul's out of the way. Paul's like, I don't care about that. All I care about is that they're out there preaching the gospel. Now, you can make the argument. What happens if somebody who's not preaching from pure motives? Does that always end out really well and successful? Sometimes, perhaps. But then also that can end in disaster if you're not preaching out of proper motives, and if you're not leading the life that you should be, and that gets found out. Certainly, if there's something wrong with your motives, there may be other things wrong as well. Okay, so sometimes there might be some good that comes out of it, but for the most part, what we've seen is that there are bad things that happen because of envy. Let's think of some modern examples. What kind of things can you think about today? Some situations where there could be envy. Particularly, let's think about it in context of here in the church. What could be some ways in which some people are envious?
Some people can sing and some of us can't.
Okay, let's take that for a moment. Now, so some of us can sing and some of us can't. So there's maybe some jealousy in there. But what if you would be generally regarded as a good singer? And this was true, and this was not necessarily the envy. But what if you're in a congregation where there's a professional opera singer?
My first congregation had 2 professional opera singers.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you have somebody who's knowledgeable about music, you have somebody who has a good voice, and maybe that spurs you on, as some have said, maybe that spurs you on to maybe take some voice lessons or try to improve your ability to sing. Where does it become envy?
You wish they'd visit someplace else so that you could just sing a regular song.
I wish they'd go somewhere else. I wish something would happen to them to where they go somewhere else, or maybe they have a nice little stroke of laryngitis. Of course, then again, what is that? And that's pretty petty, because what's their profession? You're hoping something goes wrong with their profession, so somebody might take some of the distraction off of you. Think about it from a song leader standpoint. You have some song leaders that are very well known. You have others that aren't so well known. What if you started wishing that, hey, there's this song leader in the area, he's the one that they always invite to all the singings. He's the one that gets 5 songs and I get 2. What if, and then you find out he gets fired from his job and he has to relocate. Oh, there's some envy. Tim.
Well, a general thing is that if you're envious of someone and the attention they're getting and you're not, you will talk bad of them to bring them low, and also speak well of yourself to bring you up. So that's a common thing that's done with regard to envy.
Okay. Yes. How about if there's another position that you want? Let's say somebody who's envious of an elder. This elder has the ability to do things that I don't have the chance to do. Or maybe there's an elder that thinks a little differently than I do. And so they're advocating for some things that I might not like. But what if he met with some misfortune? You're envying their position, their power, their ability to make decisions, and you're willing for harm to happen to them so that they don't have that influence anymore. And that can happen with positions of authority. Could it happen with somebody that's just very well regarded in the congregation? I hope this person is they've got some fantastic Bible knowledge. I wish I had a chance to show mine off. Hope something happens, maybe they'll move on.
Yeah, I've been in a congregation where there was the ministers, we had a couple of ministers in the congregation, and half of the few liked the least knowledgeable preacher, and the other half was for the standing preacher. And it was, you know, it got to be the point to where it was almost got to the point to where the church was being divided on it.
Yeah. What's 1 Corinthians?
Yeah.
I'm of Paul.
Yeah.
I'm of Cephas.
Yeah.
And if Paul, I'm a Paul, and these people over here of Cephas.
Right.
So when I read that bit about Paul standing up to Peter in Galatians, woohoo! All right. Well, there's Peter getting a little dishonor, getting put down in his place a little bit. So my chosen champion of Paul.
Then there's the people that are jealous of the building.
That was,
Two.
No.
where was the first one?
5 minutes ago.
All right. Well, I was going to play a little bit of envy, not envy, a little couple of scenarios, but it doesn't seem like I'll have time for that. There's one more that I want to do, though, if you'll indulge me for a moment. I'm going to wax political here a little bit. But consider this. Somebody dishes up some dirt on a political candidate or somebody that you disagree with. How do you feel about that? I imagine we're going to see a lot of that over the next few months on both sides. A little mudslinging. But let's think about that very, very carefully and our motivations for it. Because at the end of the day, I need to be looking at those people as people that are in need of the gospel. If I'm wishing harm on them or wishing for them to lose face, am I doing that because I think it will help lead them to Christ? Or am I doing that because they have something right now that I wish I had, or that I wish the political group that I favor has? I just want to throw that out there, because I noticed that earlier we said we don't necessarily think that envy is something we struggle with. And probably there's not many of us that are wanting some harm to happen so that we can become a more famous song leader or preacher or more well considered in the church. But there may be some other times where we come really close to envying somebody else for something that they have and potentially wishing harm on them to get it. So take that and think about it, and ask yourself, what's your when you rejoice at the downfall of someone, why am I doing this? There may be perfectly legitimate reasons for it, and there may be some that may be less so legitimate. I'm going to call that good for envy, if you don't mind. I think we've covered most everything that's in the book in one form or another. So I think we're ready to get on to discouragement, which I hear is going to be a really bad class.